Uno, dos, tres. Welcome to part 3 of the Stitch by Stitch series featuring the Grainline button-down shirt. Now, if you need some help with your burrito method, with pesky collars and collar stands, with sleeves and cuffs, then this is the Right Sew Along series just for you, so please keep on watching. Hey Stitchers, your girl Kris here. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I'm bringing you part 3 of Stitch by Stitch, a complete sew along to the Grainline Archer Classic Button-Up shirt. Now, as I have said before, this sew along will be useful for you even if you're not sewing the Grainline Archer, but you are working on a button-down shirt with a collar, with cuffs, with a button placket, that sort of thing. If you can use some help with any of those things, then this Stitch by Stitch series is perfect for you. Now, as a quick recap, for part 1, we dealt with constructing the main shirt as well as doing the burrito method. Part 2, we dealt with constructing the collar stand and those pesky collars. And for this part 3, we are going to be dealing with the sleeves and the cuffs. So if you think that that is something that you might be interested in, then make sure you keep watching this video. On a side note, if you missed part 1 and part 2, then I would definitely encourage you to go back and watch parts 1 and 2 before you watch part 3. I'll go ahead and pop the link in here and here so that you can find it easily. Once you get through with parts 1 and 2, then come on right back for part 3 and let us go ahead and set in those sleeves. So without further ado, let's get stitching. So I've gone ahead and grabbed my sleeve, and it's very important to have 2 mirrored images. Now that I have my sleeve in front of me, I did go ahead and mark in the slash line from my pattern. Now the instructions tell you to stitch a reinforcing line right the way up to your slash line. So I'm just going to mark a line 1/4 inch away from my slash line on either side, like so. And then I want to go up just about 1/8 of an inch and place a dot just like so. I then want to connect my dot to my 1/4 inch line on both sides, and I'm going to take this up to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch right on this line, and I'm going to reduce my stitch length from 2.5, which is my regular stitch length, down to about a 2.0. Now this is going to be a reinforcing stitching line because we're going to have to cut apart along the slash line. Right, so I've gone ahead and I have stitched in my reinforcing lines. I'm not sure if the camera is picking up because my thread is pretty close to my stripes. Now that I have that in place, I'm going to cut along this line right here that you can see in pink, almost to but not through my stitching. So I need to be very, very careful when I'm cutting this apart. I'm going to repeat the process on both sides. And then the next step, you'll have to grab your sleeve placket, piece number 14, and we're going to pin our sleeve placket to our stitching line. Now, just to have a guide, I am going to mark in 1/4 inch on one side of each of my plackets. Now, there is no shame in this game. If you need to mark in lines, mark them in. Trust me when I say it makes some of your sewing work a lot easier and a lot more precise. And for me, I have found my disappearing ink pen invaluable in my sewing room. So I am going to go ahead and mark in 1/4 inch marking on both of my sleeve plackets. Now that I have snipped away at my stitching line and I have drawn in my 1/4 inch marking on my sleeve placket, I'm going to put it right sides together like so, and I'm lining up the 1/4 inch marking with my stitching line right at the base or the hemline of my sleeve. I'm just going to pin it in place. Then I'm going to fold my placket to the same spot and crease it. I'll probably just grab my pen and put a little bit of a marking so that I can tell where the center of my placket is, right about there. I then want to turn my placket, still keeping right sides together, and pin the opposite side of my placket marking right at the stitching line, like so. Once I have both of my ends pinned in place, I'm going to flip my sleeve so that the wrong side of my sleeve is facing up, and I'm going to align the center point of my placket so that the tip of my slash line just comes a little bit over the 1/4 inch marking that I put in with my pen. And I'm going to pin it in place just like so. So let me give you a close-up. So we're not pinning it right to the edge of the placket. We're putting our pivot point just a little bit over the 1/4 inch marking that we marked in on our placket. Once I have those 3 areas pinned into place, I'm just going to spread my placket apart and then pin along my stitching line. You will notice that the edge of your slash line does not meet the edge of your placket. If you have your slash line meeting the edge of your placket, then you have not pinned it correctly. You want to pin your stitching line so that it is over the 1/4 inch marking line that you drew in as a guide. And this is why, in my opinion, drawing in that 1/4 inch marking line is so helpful. Once I have it pinned into place, I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to stitch along the very same stitching line that I put in before. Now, once I get closer to my pivot point, I am going to reduce my stitch length again, just because this is an area that is going to need a little bit more reinforcement, and I'll repeat the process on the opposite side. So I went ahead and I actually did one side of my cuff and my sleeve off camera, and this is how great it looks. But can I tell you that I did not follow the order of construction as per the pattern instructions. So on this side, I actually did my cuff first, and then I went ahead and set my sleeve in the round. The instructions have you set your sleeve in flat when your side seams are open first, and then go ahead and do your cuff after. Now, I'm wondering if maybe I should demonstrate the sleeve based on the pattern instructions so that you can see the sleeve being put in flat. But that just means that by the time we get to the cuff, there is going to be a lot more fabric, as it were, at the machine. The way I did it, I finished off my sleeve first, and so I was able to take just my sleeve to my machine, and then I went ahead and set in the sleeve. Now, I didn't find it particularly difficult to set in my sleeve in the round, and I feel like this sleeve draft is really good, and I did not get any puckers when I set in my sleeve. I'm really happy with my sleeve insertion. But I think for the purposes of demonstration, I'll go ahead and follow the pattern instructions on the opposite side. Now, I had asked a question, I think it might have been in my top 5 shirts video, whether putting in the sleeve when the main bodice is flat or putting in the sleeve in the round affects the movement at the arm side of the shirt. So I guess now I'm finally going to find out, because one side, as I said, I put the sleeve in after I had closed up my side seams, and on this side we're going to follow the pattern instructions and put the sleeve in on the flat. But before we can get to that, we need to go back and finish off our sleeve continuous placket. So the last time we left off by attaching our placket to our sleeve using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this is what your placket should look like on your placket side. And this is what it should look like on the sleeve side. You wanted to have caught your placket just about a 1/16 or so of an inch right here at the pivot point. Now the next step is going to be to press your seam allowances towards your placket, which I have already done. And I'm pressing it, as with everything else, from my wrong side first and then from my right side. Once that has been done, you're going to fold your placket inwards towards your seam allowance like so, and press it, and then fold it one more time so that it overlaps your stitch line just a little bit. You want to pin it in place, take it to your machine, and then edge stitch from the right side of your sleeve, making sure to catch in the folded over seam allowance. Now, if your sewing skills are perhaps more towards the beginner end of the spectrum, you might want to close out your placket by edge stitching it from the wrong side. So your choice, whether you want to edge stitch from the inside or whether you want to risk it and top stitch from the outside. So I'm just going to press mine into place now, take it to the machine, and then stitch it down into place. This is what the placket looks like from the wrong side, and this is what it looks like from the right side. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to fold our placket together right sides together like this so that the wrong side of your shirt is facing up. And then, let me just zoom in. We want to go and stitch a diagonal line from our stitches on the placket towards the edge of the placket, just like so. So I'm just going to use my ruler again, and I'm just going to draw a diagonal line right from the corner of my placket outwards like so. So I'm going to stitch now, but I'm going to be very careful. I want to stitch from my stitching right here on the placket to the end of the placket, being sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of my stitching line. This is what it looks like once stitched, and once we have that stitched into place, we're going to open back our sleeve, and on the side of the sleeve that has the markings for the pleats, we're going to turn the placket inwards like this, place a pin, and baste it into place just along the bottom of the sleeve. Now, because I want to cut down on the amount of times that I go to and from my machine, I'm actually going to fold my pleats into place at this point. So I want to pinch my pleat from the outside and fold it towards the inner notch. Place a pin, and then from the outside I'm going to pinch my notch and bring it towards my inner notch like so, and pin this one into place as well. That way, when I go to my sewing machine, I can baste my pleats into place and my placket into place all in one stitch. And here we go. Now, if you decide that you want to do your cuff first, you're going to need to finish off the side seams of your sleeves. So you're going to stitch it using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then finish your seams with your serger or your pinking shears or a machine zigzagging over your edges, whatever method you're using to finish your seams. Now, because I want to follow the instructions for the purpose of the demonstration, I am actually going to set in my sleeve at this point. Now, to set in your sleeve, the instructions have you do 2 lines of gathering stitches right around your sleeve cap, starting at the back notches and ending just at the front notch. Now, when you do your gathering stitches, you want to use the longest stitch length on your machine, and you don't want to backstitch at either the beginning or the end. You want to also make sure that you leave some thread tails, just like so, so you have enough to pull. Now, I can tell you that you're not going to need to gather your sleeve too much. This is a easing stitch because this sleeve is a smoothly setting sleeve. This is not a sleeve that has like lots of gathers or pleating at the sleeve cap. So you want to gently tug at your gathering stitches just to ease the sleeve a little bit. Now, I'm not going to pull it too much. I'm going to wait to pin it into my arm side, and then I can continue making the adjustments. So I'm just pulling it just a little bit, just like so. So I'm going to put this into my sleeve now, and then I can adjust my gathering accordingly. To set in my sleeve, I'm first going to lay my shirt out right sides facing upwards. I'm going to grab my sleeve, and I'm going to line up the front notch, which is a single notch in your sleeve, with the front notch on my shirt. I'm placing a pin like so. I then want to line up the end of my sleeve cap with the end of my arm side towards the front, just like so. And then I want to find the notch on the sleeve head right here, and I'm going to line that up with a notch on my yoke back piece. Now, this shirt has a forward shoulder seam, and so you'll find the notch for your sleeve right on your yoke back piece. I'm also going to pin it into place there. I then want to pin my back notches into place. And the back notches have a double notch, both on the sleeve and on your shirt. And then we want to pin our back sleeve just like so. Once we have our sleeve seams lined up, we have our notches in place, then we can go about pinning the rest of our shirt into place. Now, I'm first going to pin the section between the end of the sleeve and my first notch, whether it is my front notch or my back notch. I just want to pin those first. These pieces are not gathered, so they should line up perfectly at the seam line. Once I've done that, I'm going to switch to the opposite side and repeat. So now I want to pin between the head of my sleeve cap and my front notches. So I just want to ease in. Are these my front notches or back? No, these are my back notches. Either which way, you want to pin between the cap of your sleeve and whichever of your notches. Now I already pulled my gathering threads just ever so slightly before I started introducing them into the sleeve. And so when I pin it into place, I want to make sure that around the seam line is flat and smooth without any bumps, puckers, or ripples. And I'm just going to pin just like so. You can tell that I did not have to do a lot of gathering of my threads. As I had explained, because of the type of sleeve it is, these are just going to basically perform the role of ease stitching, just to help you to ease in the cap of the sleeve into the arm side. Once I've done one side, I'll repeat the process on the opposite side. You might have to play around with your easing just a little bit. You want to try and get it even as possible, so you just have a gentle ripple right here at your cut edge. Once I'm satisfied, I'm going to go back and pin it into place, and then I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to stitch it in place using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Alright, so sleeve has been set in, and I went ahead and just finished the seam allowance using my overlocker. This is what it looks like from the inside. And then this is what it looks like from the outside. Now you want to make sure when you're sewing in your sleeve to your arm side, take your time, go slowly, and keep feeling both pieces just to make sure that nothing gets stuck in the seam allowance that shouldn't be there. And when you go to overlock as well, you want to make sure that you do not inadvertently catch a piece of your sleeve or your bodice under your overlocker knife, because then you'll be left with a big hole either in your sleeve or in your bodice, and nobody wants that. So because you're going around a curve, you just want to be careful to keep feeling and pushing and moving fabric out of the way accordingly. So this is what it looks like. I'm now going to remove my gathering stitches, and if you use the very long length, then it should slip out quite easily, just like so. And then I can go to my ironing board and I'm just going to press my seam allowance towards my bodice. So I've pressed my sleeve, and guys, I'm really happy with how this looks. There's no puckering, no unwanted gathering. My sleeve is nice and flat. The shape is quite smooth. I'm really pleased with this. Now that I have done that, the next step is to go and sew your side seams and your sleeve seam in one fell swoop. So to do that, we want to line up our sleeve and our side seams right here at the seam of our sleeve. Once we're satisfied with that, we can pin it into place, like so. We then want to pin towards the edge of our shirt. Then we can find our notches, and then we pin everything in between. Then we are going to repeat the same thing on the sleeve. We're going to pin towards the hem of the sleeve, alright. Once we have all the pins in place, we are then going to take this to the sewing machine, and we are going to sew using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm just going to finish off my sleeve seams at once and then press my seams towards the shirt back. So I'm going to sew from the hem of the shirt right the way up the side seam towards the sleeve seam by the arm side, and then back down the sleeve towards the sleeve hemline. one fell swoop, and then finish off my seams with the overlocker, one fell swoop. Alright, so sleeve number 2 is in, and we now need to go and finish off the cuff piece. So in order to do the cuff, we are going to grab our cuff piece. You should have pressed under the seam allowance on the unnotched side of your cuff. So for me, that is my interface piece. I think actually, as per the pattern instructions, I should have interfaced the opposite side. I don't think it matters too much in the grand scheme of things. So I'm now going to attach my cuff to the sleeve. Now for your cuff, you want to place it, I'm going to put a marking on mine, I haven't just yet, but you want to place it so that it extends past the placket a half an inch on this side, go right the way around, and then it should extend a half an inch on the opposite side. Pin it into place, take it to the machine, and sew it using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Right, so with that pin, I'm going to take it to my machine now and stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance. My cuff has been attached to my sleeve, and the next thing we're going to do again is to grade our seam allowances. So we are going to trim down the sleeve about 1/4 inch, and then the placket about 1/8 of an inch. Alright, so my seams have been graded, and the next step is to press the seam allowance towards the cuff. So I'm going to press the seam allowance upwards towards the cuff, and then I'm going to fold my cuff right sides together like so, and then I'm going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance diagonally, pivot right here at the corner, and then down towards the end of my cuff. Now if you're doing the regular cuff, you won't have this angular piece, it will just be one straight piece, and you will just stitch your short ends using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, because I'm using the cuff with the angled piece, I need to sew a 1/2 inch towards the point right here, pivot, and then sew down the 1/2 inch to the end of the cuff. So first things, press the cuff, then we're going to sew the cuff. So I have stitched down my cuff diagonally and then down towards the sleeve. And as usual, I'm now going to trim down my seam allowances. Now I don't want to trim these seam allowances too close to the stitching line, because once you fold it over, you'll find it more difficult to conceal it to the inside. But I do want to get up in the corner right here and at the top like so. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the opposite side. Alright, that will do. Now I'm going to push my finger up in the tip, finger press it towards the interface side, and then flip my collar right side out. And this is what it looks like. I'll repeat the process on the other side, and then I'm going to go and give my collar, not my collar, what am I saying? My cuff, I beg your pardon, a good press. Right, so this is what we're looking like. We haven't even pressed it, and look how neat and sharp my collar looks already. But I am going to press it because never skip the pressing. My cuff has been pressed, and now I want to make sure that my cuff facing, as it were, covers the stitching line ever so slightly from the inside. Then I'm going to hold it in place and just pin. I am going to do my top stitching at the outside of my cuff and catching the cuff facing on the inside, but I am going to top stitch right the way around my cuff. So I'm just pinning it into place, making sure that the stitching on the inside is covered. So I'll just double check once I have a couple pins in. Just like so. Once I'm satisfied that it's all covered and I think I'm going to get everything caught in, then I will take it to my sewing machine and then stitch it into place. I present to you my finished sleeve cuff. So this is what it looks like. I think it looks pretty good, you guys. And I did manage to catch my cuff from the inside, so I've covered all of the raw edges. I do need to go and clip like all the loose threads and whatnot. And we are pretty much done with our cuff for now. We're going to need to round back to it later on to do the buttonholes and buttons. But for now, we are finished with the cuff. Now, I should mention that when I started my top stitching, I started it at the sleeve seam. I know it's very difficult to see, but this is where the sleeve seam is. And I started my top stitching right here, went all the way around the cuff and back stitched here. That is just because it kind of hides the back stitching right at the sleeve seam, which is going to be like underneath the arm, like on this side, as opposed to like on the top of it. And it also makes it easier to start. I find when you try to top stitch and you start right here at the cuff, it's difficult because it shifts the undercuff a little bit when the machine starts moving and your feed dogs start moving. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. I really hope I am. But I have just found it easier to start my top stitching from right about the sleeve seam of my cuff. So now that we finished the cuff, our shirt is making good progress. And so we now need to move on to the hemline. Remember that I have not yet finished off my placket. We're going to get back to it shortly, but I'm going to go ahead and do my hem first. All right, you guys, there you had it. Part 3 is in the bag. So far in this series, we have conquered constructing our main shirt, including doing the burrito method. We have dealt with the collar stands and collars. We have dealt with pesky sleeves and cuffs, and we can now move on to the finishing touches on our Grainline Archer. So if you're interested in that, now would be a great time to subscribe and make sure that you keep your eyes open for when part 4 of this series drops right here on the channel. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, if you found it instructional, be sure to go ahead and give your girl a thumbs up. Now, leave me a comment down below and let me know whether you learned from this sew along. Psst, your girl likes to know. Listen, you guys, doing these video tutorials are tons and tons of work, and I just want you guys to reassure me that I'm not, I don't want to say wasting my time, because I feel like if I'm helping at least one person, then it's not time wasted. But a little bit of encouragement is always good. So drop me some comments down below. Now, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, then like, what are you doing? Go ahead and click that subscribe icon, turn your notifications on so that you do not miss part 4 or any other of my upcoming videos. Now, until next time, you guys, stay calm, stay cool, stay safe, and absolutely keep sewing. Peace.